A movie about a silent killer has captured and kept people's attention almost 50 years later. Join me as we dive into a retrospective of John Carpenter's Halloween. Hey everybody, how you doing? It is I, the Terrorific Lady, otherwise known as Brandy, and welcome to Retro Horror School and a happy Friday to you. Well, it's finally here. The things that I have been talking about that I have been wanting to do and bring to Retro Horror School, the retrospectives. First off, I want to thank all of my supporters. Flat Noodle, thank you so very, very much for your support. If you would like to support my YouTube and get such perks as joining the private areas of Discord and getting to see videos one day early, then go to ko-fi.com/terrificlady or twitch.tv/terrificlady. So here we go. I've been teasing that I was going to be bringing retrospectives to the channel for a long time, and what better director to start off with than John Carpenter, and what better film to start off with than Halloween. But let me define very briefly what exactly a retrospective is before we jump into things. A retrospective is a review or examination of a film or a film director's work, often through screenings, discussions, or essays that looks back at past achievements or events. Basically, what it does is it examines a film in the context of the time that it was made and then discusses what place it still has in horror today and what legacy it has left. John Carpenter isn't only a director, he's a producer, screenwriter, composer, and editor. He has over 20 films credited to his name. 11 of them alone are horror films. And it is his work in horror that truly cemented his legacy. From an early age, John Carpenter was a big fan of westerns and of sci-fi, particularly the films The Thing from Another World. Sound familiar? And Forbidden Planet. He was making short horror films on 8mm before he even hit high school. In the 1970s, horror wasn't just about jump scares and gore. Horror in this era hit a little bit differently. Horror, as I mentioned in past videos, has always been a mirror held up to society to reflect their anxieties and the fears of that time. And the fears of that time in the 70s were the economic crisis, the Vietnam War, and a growing distrust of institutions in the government. These fears kind of seeped into the fabric of horror films. There were a lot of tropes like religious horror and Satanism, slashers, and even a grindhouse style horror. And unlike the horror of decades past, the 70s were starting to see a shift towards more violence, blood in some instances, and gore in some instances. And also set in realistic places, which was mirroring the real life horrors that people faced. Enter John Carpenter's Halloween. This film was released on October 25th, 1978, with a budget of around $320,000 to $325,000, depending on where you look. And it was set in the fictional yet very realistic town of Haddonfield, Illinois. And little known fact, it was also inspired by Dario Argento's Giallo, Deep Red, which came out in 1975. So the silent killer, the first person point of view, the relentless tension, these elements made Halloween stand out. And many believe that this movie was responsible for launching and inspiring the slasher craze of the 1980s. And Halloween is unique because it basically invented the wheel. There were some interesting artistic kills, and you saw the kills, but there wasn't a lot of gore involved. And then there's Michael Myers, who is part of the pantheon of horror icons now, but back then a relative unknown. Where did the idea for Michael Myers come from? In the documentary, A Cut Above the Rest, John Carpenter said,
when I was in college, I had a class, psychology or something, and we visited a mental institution, and this was in Kentucky. And I visited the most serious mentally ill patients. Then there was this kid, I must have been 12 or 13, and he literally had this look that I gave the lines to Donald Pleasance to say.
I met this 6-year-old child with this blank, pale, emotionless face and the blackest eyes, the devil's eyes. I spent 8 years trying to reach him, and then another 7 trying to keep him locked up, because I realized that what was living behind that boy's eyes was purely and simply evil.
It's a schizophrenic stare, is what it is. It's a real evil stare. And it was unsettling to me. And it was like the creepiest thing I'd ever seen, just because as a stranger, it was completely insane.
And the name Michael Myers was chosen in honor of the European distributor of Carpenter's previous film, Assault on Precinct 13, which came out in 1976.
Many of the names that they used, one comes to mind, Michael Myers, were little in-jokes that John and Debra used from their own experiences.
Michael Myers was the distributor of Assault on Precinct 13 in England.
Michael Myers pushed it into the London Film Festival. That's where my reputation kind of began. So I felt I owed him. So that was my tribute to he was this dearest, dearest man.
The plot is very simple and very straightforward. 15 years after Michael is sent to an institution because he killed his sister Judith when he was 6, he breaks out of this institution and goes back to Haddonfield to kill again, more specifically 3 teenagers, including Laurie Strode, played by Jamie Lee Curtis. The main themes of Halloween are very simple too, but also very effective. You're definitely not safe, even in places where you should feel safe. Naivety and innocence is shattered by the harsh realities of the world, and evil doesn't necessarily need a name, a face, or even a voice to terrorize you. And the overall tone of this film, suspense and dread, especially marked by the cool blue tones, the almost chilling tones that is used at night. Now let's dive a little bit into the behind-the-scenes magic. Erwin Yablans, who founded Compass and served as its president, caught Assault on Precinct 13 and was like, I like this guy Carpenter. I want to get him to direct a horror movie. He knew that Carpenter would be the perfect director for Compass's debut horror film. Not just debut horror film, debut film in general. Yablans wanted a story about babysitters being stalked, and when Carpenter and Debra Hill started writing this story, they set it on October 31st, Halloween. Hence the name. Hill explained, I wanted a Midwest sleepy town. The idea of pulling off the veneer and seeing what lies beneath intrigued me. What's so interesting to me about horror movies is that they take place in small towns where they don't have a huge police force. You put the story in a sleepy town, really beautiful homes, nice full trees, it seems safe. You think nothing could go wrong there, nothing could be further from the truth. Every town has a secret, every town has that lore of something that went horribly wrong with it. What inspired me was Rear Window, when you pull off the veneer and have a peek inside of each of the apartments. The idea of pulling off the veneer and what lies beneath has always intrigued me. Carpenter was paid $10,000 and 10% of the film's total profits as long as he stayed within the film's 20-day shooting schedule. So Halloween was filmed in 20 days, which seems like, though, quite the feat. And he even wanted his name above the title. He wanted it to be John Carpenter's Halloween, because he wanted everybody to know that he directed it. And this was a move that was practically unheard of for the time, especially for a director who had only directed a few films before Halloween. Dark Star and the previously mentioned Assault on Precinct 13. And even Tommy Lee Wallace, who edited Halloween, echoed the same sentiments. John was a little ahead of his time. Brandy is all the rage now, and I just think John was working very hard to set himself apart and create a brand for himself. In creating Laurie Strode, Carpenter and Hill looked to Howard Hawks for inspiration because he always created strong roles for women. And it is with this inspiration that they wrote Laurie Strode and that they cast Jamie Lee Curtis to play her. Hill said that Jamie is very much like Laurie. She's very introspective, very complicated. There are many interesting facets to Jamie, and there is a very beautiful innocence that the business still hasn't ruined. Carpenter also added this about Laurie. It wasn't my intention to make a moral point. I just hadn't thought of it. The other girls were busy with their boyfriends. They were busy with other things. Laurie had the perception, because she's not involved in anything. She's lonely, she's looking out the window. So he's saying, I didn't mean to start that whole trope of the final girl surviving because of that. It just happened. Hill also added, we wanted to make Laurie a strong character who is very willful and feared nothing. Someone who is quiet yet defiant and faced the enemy. Laurie had an inner strength you didn't see on the outside. For the foil to Michael Myers, his psychiatrist, Dr. Sam Loomis, Carpenter wanted to cast a British actor, but he went to Peter Cushing and he went to Christopher Lee, and they both turned him down.
My first choice was Peter Cushing. Peter Cushing was a famous British actor. I just loved him since I was a kid. This was in 1978. In 77, Peter Cushing was in Star Wars. So we called his agent and made an offer, and he would never deem to be in your little low-budget film.
Christopher Lee also declined to do the role. And it was funny, years later, we ran into Christopher Lee at a party, and he said, that is the biggest mistake I ever made of my career, is to not be in this movie.
I remember reading something that Christopher Lee really regretted turning down that role, but he was never able really to work with John Carpenter. I guess that was just the nature of the business. They could never work together because of conflicts or something like that. So when those two British actors turned Carpenter down, he casted Donald Pleasence instead. And Hill joked, we liked him so much we made him the president in Escape from New York. I think because of his wonderful use of the English language, he gave extra importance to John's writing about the personification of evil. Now, on a movie set, everything moves fast, and Halloween was no exception. Yablans wanted to get this movie in theaters in time for Halloween, so they worked backwards from that deadline. Carpenter and Hill, they wrote the script in about 2 weeks. The film was shot in about 20 days in May of 1978, so it wasn't fall, no fall weather, so we're around late spring, early summer. So the crew had to keep sweeping up and reusing what pieces of fall foliage they had to use. Editors Tommy Lee Wallace and Charles Bornstein cut and edited the film not long after that, after shooting was done, and Carpenter composed the score in 3 days, because as he told Fangoria, hey, I was the fastest and the cheapest that I could get. Now, another thing that's iconic about Michael Myers is the mask. They were having trouble choosing between a clown mask and a few other masks, but it was Tommy Lee Wallace that ended up making the decision that would become part of horror iconography forever.
Production designer Tommy Lee Wallace went up to a magic shop right here on Hollywood Boulevard and bought a William Shatner Star Trek mask, Captain Kirk mask. Spray painted it, cut the eye holes a little bit different, fixed the hair, and there we go.
Wallace said this about the mask. There was no question that once the Captain Kirk mask came out, it was really unsettling. We knew we had what we needed. I think all you had to do is look at that mask and say, something is desperately wrong here, and I'm scared. The opening sequence was made possible by the use of Steadicam. And cinematographer and frequent Carpenter collaborator, try saying that 3 times fast. Cinematographer, frequent Carpenter collaborator. I give up. He said, this was a new technology that we, by the seat of our pants, learned to use. There was nowhere to learn yet. John wanted to do something for the opening shot that took advantage of it, and that would be completely new and innovative that you couldn't do with conventional camera shots. Carpenter said, I've always admired long tracking shots in the opening of movies. Touch of Evil immediately comes to mind, and there's one in the original Scarface. An acquaintance of mine had made a short film that was all one take. And it was really an engrossing way of moving the camera through an environment. Dean Cundey also said, working with John was a revelation because suddenly here was a guy who was interested in using the camera in a creative way, drawing the audience in. I thought, boy, this is just my cup of tea, where the camera is contributing and you're telling the story with visuals. Another clever trick was how Cundey and Carpenter would start with a wide shot and then slowly move in closely and tighter to where the viewer would essentially feel like they were trapped, for instance, right along in the closet with Laurie. We were up close and personal and feeling her fear and her anxiety. It was a very calculated move, and it showed that even very early on, Carpenter had such a strong command over his craft. Yet he insisted that Halloween and filming Halloween was more of a stylistic exercise for him. That's all we had. We only had the style because we had a very slim plot. An escaped lunatic comes back to this town and starts killing these babysitters. A lot of horror can live or die on visual flourish. Horror requires mood and tempo. It's a little trickier, and usually you're suspending some sort of ridiculous premise that you have to make people believe in. And a big part of that buy-in and to make people suspend some sort of belief is a really killer, kick-ass musical score. Though this wouldn't come until much later. He considers music a separate task and says that he doesn't really think about the music while he's shooting. But Hill believed the opposite. She believed that Carpenter had already scored the film in his mind while he was shooting. Carpenter said that he had already had the theme written in his mind for years.
As I remember it now, maybe it was more, but I had about 3 or 4 days to do the score to Halloween. Basically record the whole thing. I wanted something deadly simple and something that would just eat at you a little bit. And my father bought me a pair of bongos when I was really young for Christmas. He taught me how to play 5/4 time on them. So all I did was to get on piano and do 5/4 with an octave. And that was where it came from.
The film was released in 1978 and slowly grew in popularity, and it all started growing out of the Midwest. Carpenter said that low-budget horror films were dormant, slightly sleeping at the time. Halloween revived this let's go to the movies and have fun idea. Lots of screaming, lots of grabbing your dates, lots of laughter afterwards. Word of mouth just kind of grew as people saw it, and critics had a really good response to it. Newsweek called it a superb exercise in the act of suspense and the most frightening flick in years, and Roger Ebert called it an absolutely merciless thriller. Halloween was even inducted into the Library of Congress in 2006 for films that are culturally and historically significant. And Steve Leggett, the staff coordinator for the registry, explained why. Halloween launched Carpenter's career and started the slasher genre. Some people may say that's good or bad, but it's a really good film. Cundey also recognized the value of Halloween and its legacy. The audience recognized the value of Halloween. The fact that they empathized with the characters and even subconsciously appreciated the visual storytelling. It was very rewarding to see that happen as opposed to a lot of the films I've worked on, which were sort of projector fodder for the drive-ins that would disappear after 2 or 3 weeks. Halloween 1978 may not have known it back then, but it had such a huge impact on horror. It popularized slasher films. It started the 80s slasher craze. It defined classic horror tropes, and it even influenced countless other horror films, among them being the films of the Scream franchise and Candyman. The film sets the bar for slasher horror, but in a good way. The plot is simple, and the villain of the story, you don't need to know why he is what he is or why he does what he does. The ambiguity of the evil is what cements this movie in my mind as being iconic and terrifying. Even Rob Zombie said, "Not since Psycho had there been a horror movie that powerful. John Carpenter basically reinvented the wheel." Films like Stage Fright, The Funhouse, Alone in the Dark, My Bloody Valentine, Psycho 2, April Fool's Day, and Blood Simple were influenced by Halloween. Halloween could be considered by some to be a blasé horror film of the 70s, a slasher that, compared to the kinds of slashers that are released now, it may seem very tame to some. There were some slashers that came out before Halloween that maybe shared some of the, or started the same or similar tropes, but Halloween is a different kind of slasher. It brought a sense of atmosphere and almost relied completely on the atmosphere, the isolation, and the tension. And it also relied on empathizing with the characters who were trying to escape Michael. It most definitely still has a place in today's society, as it spawned later sequels, even going all the way through up to Halloween Ends. And it showed where slashers got their start, so to speak. That is what's very important. To learn to appreciate where slashers are now, you have to learn to appreciate where they began. And watching John Carpenter's Halloween does that. Every John Carpenter movie has his imprint or his DNA. So what elements from Halloween appear in his later horror films? A very minimal atmospheric score that you will see across many of his works, suspenseful pacing to amp up the isolation and paranoia aspects of his work, and a big focus on atmosphere. This is the definitive Carpenter film, the one that set all the tone and pacing for his later horror works. And if you had to ask, well, what is the most Carpenter thing about this movie? It would have to be the isolation of being set in a small town and also in a house where you really can't get away from the killer, and the sense of paranoia, not knowing where Michael Myers could be at any one given moment. And that is the end of this retrospective on John Carpenter's Halloween. I will be doing retrospectives on all 11 of John Carpenter's horror films. Yes, indeed. And various other videos related to John Carpenter's horror films will be sprinkled in between. So after I finish up the retrospective for John Carpenter's The Thing, you will see a video that goes over John Carpenter's horror score. If you have a favorite horror movie score of John Carpenter's, so the film of his that has your absolute favorite music in it, drop it in the comments below. Thank you so very much for watching this video. Please like and share with fellow horror fans because it really does help. And if you haven't already, subscribe and hit that bell so you never ever miss another Retro Horror School class. I'm going to toss up a few more videos here that I think you might like. Class is dismissed, everybody, for now, but I will see you next time.